So our first talk today is Northern Exposures, Radiation in Canada, and it's presented by Marc MacKenzie, who is a physics professor here at the University of Alberta. He is currently the Director of Medical Physics for Community Oncology for the province of Alberta, and an assistant professor in the Department of Oncology, Division of Medical Physics, where he teaches and supervises grad students. So we can get a big round of applause for Marc.
As mentioned, I work for Alberta Health Services in the Department of Community Oncology, and I'm director of physics there. I'm not actually a physics professor at UA. I'm a professor in the Department of Oncology and the Faculty of Medicine, which is a weird thing for a physicist to wind up doing and being. So in this talk, I'm going to go over briefly a bit about who I am, because I often get people ask me what I do, and it's rarely a short answer. It's probably more my fault than anything. We'll also talk about what radiation is, which makes sense for this talk. And we'll talk about some of the ways that it impacts our lives. And I'm trying to get a bit of a Canadian focus. Some things are universal though. So, my background. So I've got a degree in physics from the University of Alberta. I specialized in medical physics. I looked at the optimization of the delivery of radiation therapy and delivering more complex treatment plans. And some of the things I worked on kind of fed into other research and have led to being applied in the clinic. So some of the latest techniques I'm quite familiar with, and I have a fairly good understanding of what they are. And that's part of what medical physicists do. They assure the quality and safety of technology in the clinic. And that can be therapy for treating cancers. That can be imaging for your imaging of any body site you can imagine, using CT or MR or ultrasound. And not only do they assure quality and safety, they also do research and teaching to keep current and also move that technology forward. That's what I am. That's what I do. Well, that's not who I am. That's what I do 9 to 5, but it's a bit of part of who I am. I'm also speaking as a private individual. I just need to say that because I work for Alberta Health Services. I contacted the media people, and they said, well, yeah, okay, this is great. Talk about whatever you want to talk about, but you're not representing AHS. There we go. Said it. So what I want to talk about is radiation. So what is radiation? Radiation is nothing more than energy moving from one place to another. And that can take several forms. It can be in the form of particles or chunks of electromagnetic energy projected from the particles. It's energy from one place to another. So when we think about our direct experience, we have lots of direct experience with it. There are two kinds when we talk about electromagnetic. Actually, we'll talk about almost particle radiation: ionizing versus non-ionizing radiation. So ionizing radiation is anything that has the ability to knock an outer shell electron. You can go back to, you can go back to, I guess, high school physics. You can go back to the simplified Bohr model of the atom. So you've got the nucleus in the middle, lots more space in this. Then the electrons in orbit around that, or a sort of cloud around that, or probability around that nucleus. So loosely held onto there, in the very outer reaches, there are electrons that can be easily knocked out. And if you have enough energy, you can knock the deeper ones out as well. That atom then becomes hungry for a bomb. And that can lead to problems, as I'll talk about in a little bit. So that's ionizing radiation. It's got enough energy to knock out an electron. Non-ionizing radiation, we have a lot more direct experience with. We have experience that goes back to the dawn of civilization. You're looking at warming yourself at a fire. You get closer, you get warmer. It's one of our R-squared, we call it this inverse square relationship between how close you get and how intense that heat is, or how intense that energy is coming off of that source. So you've got that direct experience, and all around us, with light waves all around us. Non-ionizing radiation, I see a couple Wi-Fi routers up on the wall. So there's lots of non-ionizing radiation bathing us constantly. Radio waves, not only from our FM sources, the cell phones we've asked to not use, I guess. Or no, you're supposed to, yeah, go ahead. do whatever, right? Don't really care. But my brain is not going to distract me. Somehow like those animal shows were all tack. No, don't test that. Don't test that. Okay, so non-ionizing radiation does not have enough energy to break chemical bonds, but it can cause heating. You get this resonance happening. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. So, electromagnetic radiation is, we break that up into the non-ionizing group. So that includes RF, so that's radio frequency waves, microwaves, infrared, visible light spectrum, ultraviolet up to a point. And then when we start to get into the sort of the UVB, so you look at your subscreen, it's UVA, UV, you're starting to get just enough energy to start to knock out the most loosely held electrons. And that's why exposure to ultraviolet radiation can could cause skin cancer. So that's something you want to be aware of. There are also radioactive substances that spontaneously emit ionizing radiation. And I put this little note here that exposure to radiation does not necessarily make things radioactive. So I had a story where my sister, who should know better, told me that a friend of ours had received radiation burns on his tongue because he took things out of the microwave too soon. Okay, technically true, right? It's heated up enough, it's got all this infrared radiation, it's got heat energy. And if you want to think of just a regular burn as a radiation burn, it's hot, I guess. But it's not the way we think of it. Also, a lot of the medical technology we use, like the X-ray scanners, if you're getting a simple X-ray or a CT scan, you're not going to be electroradioactive. There are other things that we can do therapy-wise. There are actually live radioactive sources that we use sometimes in treating patients. Permanently implant live radioactive sources into, say, prostate cancer patients. That patient is now radioactive, just so you know. But so weakly that I don't even worry about it. Although, interestingly enough, thanks to the increased security at airports, they have a little card to say why they set off the meter at the airport to say, hey, your house is radioactive. They never say you're hot. So again, electromagnetic spectrum, we can see a lot more about this. We've got this whole range from radio waves, microwaves, infrared, so-called soft X-rays, hard X-rays. Bugs me a little bit that gamma rays are even sort of energy range. The only difference between X-rays and gamma rays is one is produced by deceleration of charged particle in the field of the nucleus, and the other one comes from within the nucleus because of decay, and those energy ranges overlap. There's not a fixed energy we say that's X-ray, that's gamma ray. It's actually the origin that usually what that does define what it is. I'm talking about particles. So some nuclei decay, and this is by no means an exhaustive list, but we've got alpha particles. So a nucleus can spontaneously emit what is effectively a helium atom, and that we've got energy in that form, and therefore decay down to a different energy state. Or it can, a neutron can become a proton and also become an electron, a beta, and therefore you get a shift in the state of the nucleus to another energy state. Or it can give off energy in the form of gamma rays, and let's do lump and X-ray just to show the penetration a little bit. And also you can have neutrons emitted. Neutrons, so the neutrons appear to be the most penetrating. This again, this is one of these cartoony depictions. It's not quite as simple. If you had a very energetic alpha versus a not very energetic beta, you have differences. Same thing with the neutrons. Neutrons actually behave a lot like, in terms of their interaction, like gammas and X-rays. If you look at a penetration graph, and that's because they both have charged particles. You get very different behaviors in the charged particles. They tend to bounce around around the field of the atoms. So you're all probably familiar from long ago with periodic table of elements. So when we're talking about particulate radiation and radioactive substances, you probably know that as soon as you get above lead, you're starting to get into radiation mass, which is sounds like a terrible thing. So radioactive substances occur sort of about that point, and acts the same as, well, anything else in that number of protons. The number of neutrons will vary, and that's actually what gives you this difference here in your overall atomic number. So your Z, your atomic number, your mass number changes, your atomic number stays the same. So this determines your chemical properties, and this determines really whether or not you're a stable person, or stable element. Unstable people. Okay, so so where do these things come from? So when you look at all these elements, a lot of these are, there's a small percentage of atoms which are going to be radioactive. You've got radioactivity inside your body. I'll talk about that maybe again in a minute. But it probably was going to mention it now. I mean, you've probably heard of radiocarbon dating. That's because there's a certain percentage of carbon atoms which are radioactive. And you've got a lot of radioactive potassium in your body. It's actually a fairly large source of internal radiation. So, where does radiation come from? Some of it is just naturally occurring. So there are natural sources of ionizing radiation. It can come from cosmic radiation. So the sun is constantly giving off these bursts of energetic particles, and you get interactions happening around the atmosphere. You get particles showering down. Most of that happens, I think, further away. And I think somebody's talking about the sun later on today. Natural isotopes, as I mentioned, is a certain percentage of the atoms that are going to be radioactive. Non-ionizing, obviously you've got light from the sun, you've got fire, you've got body heat, infrared. There's man-made sources, so ionizing radiation, you have X-rays, which could be, well, actually it's mostly medical X-rays, and that can be for cartoon therapy, or it could be for imaging. We tend to, as it were, turn up the dial, go to 11, and we treat cancers. In fact, we have some machines which actually purposely have two modes, one which is a high energy for treating cancer, and low energy for imaging the patient while they're still on the bed, which is kind of cool, because I don't have to treat that. I'll actually show you a picture of a machine. That's a Canadian innovation. And just suddenly occurs to me, I meant to start a stopwatch on my computer. So I don't have to keep on the clock, which I'm going too long. Okay, so we've already pretty much talked about all this history. So what are the effects of non-ionizing radiation? I don't know if you can see this. Yeah, this is sort of a common view of radiation, that you're going to get mutations. And yeah, that's actually true, but most mutations are just non-compatible. They're not interesting. This would be cool, but most of them are sort of not that interesting, and they're not compatible with life. So you wind up getting a cellular process happening called apoptosis. The cell says, and it gives up, and it dies. I'm sure nobody described apoptosis that way except me. The cell gives up, goes home. So for non-ionizing radiation, at high energy levels you get heating, and that can be a problem. Actually, so they've looked at certain systems in the body. They've done animal studies where they've done exposure of rabbits to non-ionizing radiation at high levels, and they can induce cataracts. That's because in the eye, because the eye is not well vascularized. There's not a lot of blood vessels going through there, and so there's no good way to take away heat. So you'll wind up getting these sort of heat defects. These things happen in the eye. At low levels, there's no known definitive macroscopic effects. I actually added the word macroscopic. I didn't have it in the earlier version. And I say macroscopic because we're talking about whole bodies and whole systems, versus where a lot of the work happens with non-ionizing radiation to determine the effects happens at the cellular level. So there are lots of petri dishes being given, lots of amounts of non-ionizing radiation. And the results there are equivocal, which is to say some labs say, oh, we see some genetic effects, we see some aberrations. Another lab say, I've got nothing. So if there's an effect, it's unclear, it's not well shown, and there are other studies that happen to the human level. We'll talk about them later. Ionizing radiation, again, it's a funny thing. We do see effects, again, we study cells. It's part of it. We also study pneumonitis, which is lung damage from radiation exposure, and he did it on rats and rats. It really gave us a lot of valuable information about how people respond to being treated for lung cancer. And some of those effects are what we say deterministic. Which is to say, you give a certain radiation dose and you're pretty well sure you get this effect. So as we go above about 100 and 100% or 1 gray of energy, that's the unit we use to measure the amount of energy absorbed from radiation. You're guaranteed to get cataracts. It's a long-term effect, and so patients receiving radiation therapy in the head region, there's enough energy that's coming around the eyes, you'll just give them a heads up, this treatment will be cataracts because of treatment. It's a secondary effect, it's deterministic, you know what's going to happen. Stochastic effects are the probabilistic, the ones where we sort of say, well, 1 in 1,000 people, 1 in a million people will have this effect. And if it occurs, you can't really tie one to the other. You can't just say, yeah, that cancer is definitely caused by radiation. It's a probabilistic thing, and we just can't tie the two together. You just don't know this is the cause. So, what do I mean when I say high levels, low levels, and what's normal, and how do we measure radiation? Well, we'll come back to that. Actually, I have to say, I took out a chunk of slides here, so let me just say quickly. Actually, I will come back to, what's wrong? Let's come back to that. Come into this question, is radiation bad? I'll talk about normal levels. So too much radiation, we know, is not a good thing. If it's delivered in the same exposure, a high dose rate, we know that's bad. And for example, this 100 millisievert, this is something we call a dose equivalent. You multiply that amount I was talking about in gray by quality factor, which is the photons and electrons, that's the quality factor is 1. For the alpha particles, they do a lot more damage. Their energy deposition along their track travel is a lot denser. Therefore, we apply a higher quality factor because biologically, in a biological sense, it does more damage. That being said, ignore the units, I guess. Too much in a single exposure of high rate is going to be bad. But some areas of the world, so there's a place in Iran called Ramsar, where they actually get about 100 millisieverts a year. We'll talk about, actually, here, in conjunction with this graph. They get about 50 times the background radiation that we get in Canada, and apparently no apparent effects. That's quite likely because it's happening over such a long period of time, such a low dose rate. And there are lots of indications that our cells, we evolved in a radiation-richer world, and it would be kind of silly if there weren't mechanisms to deal with that damage, right? We know that ionizing radiation causes damage to cells. Non-stellar electron creates a hungry ion, and usually we assume that water is the free radical that actually gets activated. It forms bonds where it shouldn't, breaks DNA, causes mutations, can lead to cell death, but also can lead to an aberration which starts that cell proliferating in a way that it should not. It starts invading the tissues and all of this, same with cancer. There's every indication, though, that your body has ways to deal with that kind of damage, right? In fact, at low radiation levels, it's thought that you're actually priming your body to receive that radiation, and it's just dealing with the damage that's happening. That being said, for radiation protection purposes, and this is something that we've just gone through in my organization, actually twice now recently, in the still submitting process for our 2 new cancer centers that we're building, one which is opening up in Red Deer in November, another one which is opening up in 2016 and 2017 in Grand Prairie. We actually go through radiation calculations to see how much radiation is occurring outside the treatment areas. And we have to make sure that it's actually occurring at a level below background. If you were to stand there, essentially hugging the area every day, all day, for 1 year, which I think you should probably find better hobbies. But it's really making sure that for radiation protection purposes, we get as low as reasonably achievable. I'd say we always need to go a little further than that. So considering economic impacts and the cost of shielding, I guess it doesn't cost effectively that much more background. We've got a little bit of a slide here. We've got cosmic rays coming in, creating radioactive elements. We've got radiation from the sun. We've got internal radiation and external radiation from naturally occurring radionuclides. Inhaled radionuclides actually make up a large